30% of the land is mined, so with land mines, it's difficult to maintain. There are destruction at different levels of energy sources, so there's rarely, maybe 6 hours a day, there is electricity to operate the network. How do you address the issue of connecting people on a ubiquitous basis? So that's why we actually developed, with the partnership of the ICT Ministry, a partnership with Starlink. Got the approvals from multi-governments, from FCC to, of course, local regulations. And we decided to do something which was actually extremely controversial to the industry, because we developed a partnership where we integrated our terrestrial network with the satellite platform. Irregardless of there is electricity or not, irregardless of the terrestrial networks are properly maintained or not, today in Ukraine, every single person with a 4G-enabled phone can directly connect to a satellite without any equipment needed and can get a signal and can communicate. Now, many parties in our industry thinks that satellites, Starlink is potentially a competition. But when it is needed, it's an essential service. And with the right government policy and with the, I think, right execution, it can really open up big opportunities and build again the trust with the consumers. Ukraine is not the only example. Kazakhstan is doing the same thing. If you look to Kazakhstan, the mass of Kazakhstan is bigger than entire Europe. Only 20 million people live in that area. How do you provide a ubiquitous connectivity? The only way is through satellite integration with the terrestrial. And I think this type of thinking and policy level, ambitions of the governments are really key for bringing essential services to the people with a little bit of effort and execution capacity.
Well, Mohit, would you agree that digital transformation, data platforms, and global delivery systems can influence trust?
Oh, for sure. I feel that the essential architecture for how you provide citizen services, how you provide commercial services is very important. And this is where I feel that having the individual be the, I agree with Khan that government should not get into the business of maybe directly providing services, except where there is an absence of an alternative, where there are some services where the private sector is not incented to act, like maybe in very low density population areas. Government should provide a clear sense of frameworks, and it should allow for the maximum individual agency, right? Like we were saying, for health records, I should be able to freely share my health record with, with a provider, with an insurance company. But equally, at the end of the transaction, have the faith and the digital architecture that it would actually be removed from the systems and then come back to me, right? So I think that initial provisioning of digital services, the thought process around that is extremely important. And now we have technology that allows for individual transactions to be seamlessly done across millions and billions of people at scale, right? So that architecture is very possible now. I do feel that that will really grow trust in the system, right? At the end of the day, if you have the ability to seamlessly transact and you're quite comfortable that your data is not being used or governments and companies do not have access to the data, I feel that will be what will allow for maybe more payments, more medical records being shared, more property transactions being executed, more financial transactions being executed, because that combination of privacy as well as ubiquity is very important.
Okay, the theme this year at the World Government Summit has been a lot to do with AI and digital transformation. So this question is to both of you. Is AI, digital transformation, automation, all this reshaping transparency and accountability, Khan, to you first, is it reshaping transparency, or is it going to mold how people think?
I think the ultimate objective, of course, every government should be a better life for all, and to eradicate poverty in the countries mostly we operate in, and maybe in some other Western countries, it's about access to AI, making people having the services at higher levels. But if you think about all these, betterment of the lives of people, one of the important things is really about inclusivity. whether it is financial inclusion or it is inclusion and accessibility of AI services in the local languages with the local values of the people will be critical. And again, I see that the level of enlightenment in this area is increasing. Sovereign AI has become an agenda item in all the policies of the governments, and we are actually working hand in hand, identifying, fast-tracking local language models from Urdu to Punjabi to Bengali to Uzbek, Kazakh, Ukrainian, and develop these tools as fast as possible. And especially in AI, it's important to make these applicable to specific use cases. I think there is nothing artificial in AI. This is about augmenting competencies, skills, capabilities, and creating capacity. And we need to make sure that AI is used in such a way, that the best doctor can be in Dhaka, best teacher can be in Islamabad, best farmer can be somewhere in Kazakhstan. And to make that happen, again, it requires a public-private joint effort, a clear and directed policy from the governments and capable private companies who can execute on that.
Mohit?
No, I agree with almost everything Khan has said. I'll just make 2 quick points. The first is really around the provision of citizen services in local language, right? I think that is an extremely important and largely ignored area, because most of the LLMs are really only in English, or maybe they're in Arabic, and maybe they're in Chinese. But the world has, thousands of dialects, thousands of individual languages. And so one of the things that we've been focused on as well is creating large language models in local languages, right? So for instance, we created a large language model in Hindi called Indus that covers about 27 dialects in Hindi. We built a large language model in Bahasa Indonesian, and these will allow for provision of citizen services. We're now working with the Government of India as part of the National AI Mission to build a much larger large language model, many billions of parameters in the model. And the first use case that we're building is really to allow for students between grade 6 and grade 12 to answer and to be educated in physics in their own language, right? It's, potentially could be transformational as you look at a new generation of science whiz kids growing up. I think that's a very powerful capability that we are creating. The second point I wanted to make is it is important to stress the scale of ambition in AI. At times, I'm a bit concerned that a lot of what is coming out in terms of the ambition for AI is really about productivity only, right? And productivity is fine. Productivity is very important. But if your total ambition for AI is to be able to, get rid of a few contact center jobs or to improve developer productivity, people are really missing the picture. The objective of AI, for instance, should be how can we provide everybody a truly world-class healthcare service for $10 a month, right? That should be the scale of the ambition, rather than only in terms of productivity. And I feel that if that aspiration is not spelled out in those terms, we will have the 90% of people whose lives are at risk or whose livelihoods are at risk out to destroy this movement, right? We have to be thinking about how this will transform societies for the better, and with real use cases of transformational possibilities of AI, rather than purely job reduction.
I know we're completely running out of time, but Mohit, because you come from India and you work in the Global South, it's very important because not everyone in the Global South has access to AI. Will they miss the bus?
Well, that is a very real risk, right? That is a real risk that we saw with, digital technologies earlier and with mobile phones. But I'm happy to say that the the cycle of adoption is speeding up very dramatically, right? So while it took maybe, 30 years for mass media in the form of television to come to India after it was in the West, it only took about 10 years for mobile phones to come to India. It took only about, 3 or 4 years for instantaneous mass payment systems to come into India, or to digital identity come to India. And with these new models coming in, and with the infrastructure the government is creating, I feel that cycles are getting shorter and shorter. So I feel that is still a risk, but science look a lot better than they did earlier.
Very briefly, Khan.
Gita, if you have read *Sapiens*, Harari's book, he talks about how Homo sapiens differentiated themselves with Neanderthals. And the ability of Homo sapiens to tell a story, to gossip, to lie, made them unique in their capabilities to develop a society and community. I believe over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see more and more, not only access to an AI tool, but also data to organic transmission, which will allow us to keep more data in our memories, make faster decisions with processing capabilities over a cloud. And I believe we are at the verge of differentiating a new kind of society. And I think, yes, if communities do not adapt, they will fail.
Mohit Joshi, Kant Arzauli, thank you so much for joining us in this brilliant conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gita. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mohit. We ended with a conversation on not just trust on the global south. What forces are reshaping government investment decisions? It has not just to do with the fact that the West thinks differently from the global south. I'm being represented over here, or I'm being joined, over here by two prominent leaders from the Caribbean. Joining me today are Honorable Natalio Wheatley, Premier of the British Virgin Islands, and Honorable Dickon Mitchell, Prime Minister of Grenada. Thank you so much for joining me here. Now, before we start the conversation on investments, how is the Global South looking at not just investing in the traditional markets and areas that were a focus, but also diversifying. Let's just talk about how hot the Caribbean islands have gotten after certain actions by the United States of America. In that scenario, how much, Premier Wheatley, how much has that impacted the British Virgin Islands?
Well, first of all, let me just thank World Government Summit for inviting me here for this important conversation. The United Arab Emirates has shown great leadership, in my view, in coming together at a crucial time where the current world order is under scrutiny and under stress, but it certainly presents opportunities for us as small island developing states to redevelop an order which is more just, more equitable, more sensitive to the needs of small island developing states such as the Virgin Islands. Of course, the geopolitical tensions which exist right now are something that we are keeping a close eye on. It's certainly a challenge. For instance, when we had the brief instability in Venezuela, it caused great travel disruptions. Of course, travel was paralyzed. And of course, the military buildup, which we see very closely in the Virgin Islands, because of course we're very close to the United States Virgin Islands, where you see the military buildup very closely, very close to Puerto Rico. And of course, we want peace and stability in the region, because of course that type of instability can have an impact, of course, on our neighbors, who we have great solidarity with, but also disrupt our economy.
Okay. Prime Minister Mitchell, how is your country looking at, now we do know that the British Virgin Islands is a part or territory of the United Kingdom, but as a state, as a sovereign nation, how did Grenada look at the tensions in the waters? How did it impact business? And how did it impact your decision-making in investments?
Well, thank you for having me, and let me say thank you for those who are still here to join us for this panel. And I want to join in thanking the UAE government for the wonderful hospitality and for the significant leadership in bringing all of us together. We're actually 100 miles away from Venezuela. So that should tell you how hot, how close we are to the action. And I think in a general sense, once you had the military build up, obviously it would have created significant anxiety and unease, I think, for the Caribbean. We've, I think, since the 1980s, tried to, from a Caribbean perspective, have our region declared as a zone of peace. And I think similarly, you know, when you have incidents like the Palestinian issue, the Iranian issue in this region, I think the unease that everyone feels would have been a similar sort of approach, I think, in the Caribbean. So you would have had, for example, closure of airspace, cancellation of flights. We are heavily tourism dependent. And obviously, you can't have investment, you can't have people flying in if there's a risk of political instability or military action. So to some extent, and that obviously depends on perspective, we are relieved that it does appear that for now, the likelihood of any further military action is stayed, and perhaps there is a path for continued dialogue and diplomacy and negotiations between the US and the Venezuelan authorities that we hopefully will redound to the benefit of the region in the context of no instability and peace, and therefore an opportunity for long-term investment in our islands.
Premier Whately, moving from aid dependency to strategic investment-driven development models, how is the government, or how's the British Virgin Islands, how are you looking at restructuring, or are you looking at restructuring at all?
Well, certainly we've built a very strong economy over the years, not just reliant on tourism and traditional sectors like agriculture and fisheries. But we are a very strong financial center in the Virgin Islands. We have about 370 plus companies registered in the Virgin Islands. You know, these companies hold assets of over $1.4 trillion, facilitates 2.3 million jobs overseas, and in the region of the Middle East, we facilitate maybe about $2 billion of inward investment through our companies into the Middle East. But of course, we always have to ensure that we are staying on the ball, paying attention to what's happening in the geopolitical landscape, how it's becoming somewhat more fractured. We see regional blocs developing tendency towards protectionism, nationalism, and of course we've been able to thrive over the years because of the free-flowing capital, because we facilitate investment across borders globally. About 60% of our companies come from the Asia-Pacific region, about 20% from Caribbean and Latin America. So we are truly global in our outlook. But we certainly have to ensure and pay attention to what is taking place. And that's why we think these forums are important, because we believe the rest of us, besides the West, have to cooperate more. We have to have more solidarity. We have to have more functional cooperation, and we must also learn from best practice, which takes place around the world. We're extremely impressed with what's happening here in the United Arab Emirates, the way that you've used this investment not just to generate wealth, but a sustainable type of living, making sure that persons have good health care, good education, access to quality homes. And this is something that we would like to replicate in the Virgin Islands and in the wider region. But of course, we want to diversify our markets. We want more business coming from the Middle East, from India, etc. We are going on a big trade mission later this year to India, to ASEAN. And of course, tourism continues to be very strong, but we also want to diversify our markets in tourism. Of course, we rely heavily on the United States of America. Soon we'll be extending our airport runway, and we hope to facilitate long-haul flights that would facilitate persons coming from places like the Middle East and from Asia, etc.
All right, Prime Minister Mitchell, how is Grenada looking at diversifying beyond just the traditional sectors? Are we looking at more financial sectors as well within the country? And again, in a day and age where the Caribbean is seeing a lot of disruption, how are you prioritizing the sectors here?
Sure, thank you. Well, I should point out, I think most of the Caribbean have long gone beyond the aid model of development. To a large extent, we are all middle-income countries. I'll give an example. USAID was canceled, and my country, there wasn't a single program that was impacted because there's just no USAID to us. So we've sort of long gone beyond that and have taken, in a sense, non-traditional ways of attracting foreign direct investment. So, for example, in Grenada, our financial services are not as strong or robust as the BVI, but we have an investment migration program that has, in the last 10 years, contributed significantly to both direct government revenues as well as foreign direct investment that has allowed us to actually weather some pretty significant shocks, both in terms of economic shocks as well as climate shocks. For example, last year, and COVID. So, for example, last year we would have had a pretty devastating Category 4 hurricane very early in the hurricane season. That allowed us to withstand that shock, engage in significant rebuilding without having in any way to suspend our debt payments or engage in any sort of calamitous financial restructuring. We were able to weather the COVID-19 shutdown of the economy for almost 2 years and still pay people in the tourism sector who are out of jobs. So, our approach is, I heard the Prime Minister of Montenegro talking about the need for, a Prime Minister essentially to be the chief salesperson of the countries, and to a large extent, that's how we see our roles as well. So it's not just from a policy-making perspective, but how do you champion an environment that encourages foreign direct investment? So we think there are a couple of areas, and the Premier talked about it. Healthcare, for example. We don't see healthcare as a sector where you're just simply trying to provide, primary or reactive care to your citizens, but we see it as a specific growth sector. We have a huge offshore medical and veterinary school on an island that has, in a sense, grown enormously over the last decade, that attracts students from all over the world. It's valued at over $1 billion, has significant hedge fund investments. And so we are producing doctors from all over the world, including from Africa, Asia, the Middle East. The students come. It's accredited to the US, so they have an opportunity, both from a nursing, veterinary, and a medical perspective, to be educated in Grenada, live in perhaps paradise, and at the same time get an opportunity to then become global citizens. And we are looking to build a state-of-the-art teaching research hospital that will piggyback on this, that would allow for us to enter the medical tourism market at a high-end level that matches with our tourism. So we take this is just one extra. So traditionally, you'd see education as something a government spends to educate its citizens. We've managed to actually create an education industry that is effectively about 20% of the country's GDP by having that school. And so we think the next stage is obviously actual healthcare. And there's some clear advantages. A lot of the research that is done in Western countries. So you find the ethnic makeup is not necessarily appropriate for Africa or Asia or even the Middle East. The Caribbean is ethnically diverse. So we think it's an opportunity as well for a lot more research to be done and for us to drive innovation in areas like this. So those are some of the
Come alive,